There was a young woman named Amina who lived in a world obsessed with appearances, where beauty standards were narrow and unforgiving, where social media fed endless images of perfect faces and perfect bodies, where worth seemed to be measured in symmetry and aesthetics. Amina was 27 years old, worked as a high school English teacher, and had grown accustomed to being told by well-meaning relatives and friends that she was pretty for her size. Amina was a larger woman, what society unkindly called plus size or overweight, though she was healthy and active and carried herself with a dignity that should have transcended such labels. She had a beautiful face with expressive eyes and a warm smile, but in a culture that prized thinness, she had spent her entire adult life feeling invisible to potential suitors, feeling like her weight made her unworthy of love and marriage. Over the years, Amina had been on the receiving end of countless rejections, both direct and indirect. Marriage proposals would come to her family, only to be withdrawn when the potential groom's family saw her photograph or met her in person. Men would be interested in her personality and education and faith, but would ultimately admit they couldn't see past her physical appearance. Even within her own community, where people claimed to value character over looks, Amina had learned that her body was seen as a deficiency, a flaw that needed overlooking rather than a simple fact of who she was. The pain of these repeated rejections had shaped Amina's self-image in ways she tried not to acknowledge. She had developed thick skin, a defensive humor that allowed her to laugh at herself before others could. She had convinced herself she didn't need marriage, that she was complete on her own, that maybe God had simply written a different path for her. But on quiet nights, she would cry and pray, asking God why He had created her in a body that seemed to disqualify her from one of the most beautiful aspects of human experience: being chosen, being wanted, being loved for exactly who she was. God, she would whisper through her tears, I know you don't make mistakes. I know there must be wisdom in how you created me. But it's so hard when the world tells me every day that I'm not good enough the way I am. Please, if marriage is written for me, send me someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't wish I was different. What Amina didn't know as she prayed these desperate prayers was that somewhere in the same city, a man was praying something remarkably similar, asking God to send him someone who would see past what the world considered important and love him for who he truly was. His name was Omar, and he was 29 years old, working as a software engineer at a tech company. Omar was what most people would consider conventionally attractive, tall, fit, with striking features that drew second glances. But Omar carried something that most people couldn't see initially, something that had shaped his entire life and taught him profound lessons about the superficiality of physical appearance. Omar walked with a noticeable limp, the result of a childhood accident that had left his left leg shorter than his right and required him to wear a special shoe. He also had significant scarring on his left arm and shoulder from the same accident, burns that had healed but left permanent marks. These physical differences didn't limit Omar's ability to live a full life. He was successful, active, and capable, but they had profoundly affected his experience in the marriage market. Women and their families would be interested in Omar until they learned about his physical condition. Then, suddenly, the interest would cool. He would hear through family channels that people worried his children might inherit his condition, even though it wasn't genetic. Or they would express concern about him being able to perform his duties as a husband, though his condition didn't affect his health or abilities in that way. Or they would simply ghost him, uncomfortable with the idea of being married to someone who was visibly different. Omar had grown weary of being reduced to his physical limitations, of watching interest die in women's eyes when they noticed his limp or saw his scars. He had developed his own defense mechanisms, an intense focus on his career, a circle of close friends who valued him for his character, and a prayer life that had deepened as he learned to find his worth in God's eyes rather than human approval. God. Omar would pray during his late-night voluntary prayers. You created me exactly as I am for reasons I may never fully understand. I've accepted my body and my limitations as your will. But please, send me someone who doesn't see me as damaged or incomplete, someone who understands that physical appearance is the least important thing about a person. Send me someone who loves you first and sees me through your eyes. The story of how Amina and Omar's paths crossed began in the most unexpected way, through a community service project neither had particularly wanted to join. Amina's mother had signed her up for a volunteer program at the local Islamic Center, a weekly initiative that provided tutoring and mentorship for refugee children. Amina had protested, saying she was already busy with her teaching job, but her mother had insisted in a way that left no room for argument. You spend too much time alone, her mother had said. This will be good for you. Help others. Be part of the community. Get out of your apartment. Omar had been recruited by his younger sister, who volunteered with the program and needed help with the technology setup, computers and tablets for the children to use for their studies. He had agreed reluctantly, planning to just set up the equipment and leave, but his sister had guilted him into staying to help supervise. The first day of the program, Amina and Omar found themselves assigned to the same group of children, 8 refugees between ages 7 and 12 who needed help with English language skills and homework. Amina, as a professional teacher, naturally took the lead in the academic tutoring. Omar, with his tech skills, helped the children with the educational software and online resources. They worked side by side for 3 hours that first evening, focused entirely on the children, barely speaking to each other beyond necessary coordination. But both noticed things about the other. Amina noticed how patient Omar was with the children, how he never showed frustration when they struggled with the technology, how he spoke to them with respect and kindness. She noticed his limp, but thought nothing of it. She had students with various physical conditions and had long ago learned that such things said nothing about a person's character or worth. Omar noticed how Amina connected with the children, how she made learning feel safe and fun, how she celebrated their smallest successes and gently corrected their mistakes. He noticed her size, but thought nothing of it. He had long ago stopped paying attention to the physical standards society insisted were important. Over the following weeks, as they continued volunteering together, Amina and Omar developed an easy working relationship. They discovered they shared similar teaching philosophies, similar senses of humor, similar frustrations with how society often dismissed or underestimated children from difficult backgrounds. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond just the volunteer work. During breaks, they would talk about their jobs, their families, their faith. They discovered they attended the same mosque, but at different prayer times, which was why they had never crossed paths before. They realized they had remarkably similar values and worldviews, both shaped by experiences of being judged for things beyond their control. What made their growing friendship unusual was that neither of them was trying to impress the other. Because neither assumed the other could possibly be interested romantically, Amina because of her weight, Omar because of his limp and scars, they interacted with complete authenticity. There was no posturing, no performance, just genuine connection between two people who had stopped hoping for romantic possibilities and could therefore just be themselves. One evening, about 2 months into the volunteer program, they were walking to their cars after the session ended. It was raining lightly, and as they stood in the parking lot talking, Omar's limp became more pronounced as he tried to navigate the wet pavement. "Are you okay?" Amina asked with genuine concern. "Do you need help?" Omar smiled, appreciating that her concern seemed entirely practical rather than pitying. "I'm fine, thank you." My leg just acts up more when it's wet. Old injury. Can I ask what happened? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. So Omar told her the story. The accident when he was 8, the surgeries, the permanent changes to his body, the way it had shaped his entire life. He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Amina heard the years of rejection underlying his casual tone. People have a hard time with it, Omar admitted, especially when it comes to marriage. They see the limp or the scars and suddenly I'm damaged goods, not suitable husband material. Amina felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared experience. Understand that more than you might think. Different issue, same stupid superficiality. They looked at each other in the rain, and for the first time, both allowed themselves to really see the person standing in front of them. Not as a volunteer colleague, but as a potential partner, someone who understood rejection based on physical appearance, someone who had developed depth and faith and compassion precisely because of that rejection. Over the next several weeks, their relationship deepened. They began meeting for coffee after volunteer sessions, always in public spaces as their faith required, talking about everything and nothing, slowly realizing that they had found in each other something rare. Someone who saw past the physical to the person beneath, someone who shared their values and dreams, someone who had been shaped by hardship into someone beautiful in the ways that actually mattered. The moment when everything changed came during a late evening conversation at a coffee shop near the Islamic Center. They had been talking about marriage in abstract terms, both sharing their experiences of rejection, their struggles with self-worth, their prayers for God to send them someone who would see them truly. Can I be honest with you about something? Omar said, his voice hesitant. Over these past months, I've developed feelings for you, Amina. Real feelings. I know this might seem strange or unwelcome, and I don't want to make things awkward between us, but I believe in being direct and honest. I would like to approach your family about the possibility of marriage. Amina felt tears spring to her eyes. After years of rejection, years of being told she wasn't good enough, here was this amazing man, kind, faithful, intelligent, hardworking, asking if he could pursue marrying her. I've developed feelings for you too, she said quietly. But I need to know something. When you look at me, do you see my size? Does it bother you? Because I've had so many experiences of men saying they're interested, but really they're hoping I'll lose weight or change somehow. Omar reached across the table and took her hand, a bold gesture that showed the depth of his sincerity. When I look at you, I see someone who is beautiful. And yes, I mean physically beautiful, but more importantly, beautiful in character and faith and spirit. Your size is just a fact, like my limp is a fact. It's part of who you are, but it's not all of who you are, and it's certainly not a flaw that needs fixing. I'm not interested in some future version of you that fits society's narrow standards. I'm interested in you, exactly as you are right now. Amina began to cry in earnest then, years of pain and rejection dissolving in the face of genuine acceptance. No one has ever said anything like that to me before. They always frame it as, I can look past your size, or your weight doesn't matter to me, like it's something to be overlooked. You're the first person who's just accepted it as simply part of me. Because I know what it feels like to be reduced to your physical differences, Omar said. I know what it feels like to be measured against impossible standards. I know what it feels like to pray for someone who will see you as God sees you, completely, wholly, without the harsh judgment of superficial society. They began the process of approaching their families with serious marriage intentions. And this is where the true test came. Both families were shocked. Omar's mother couldn't understand why her son, who could have anyone, would choose a woman who was overweight. Amina's family couldn't understand why a man with Omar's condition would be interested in their daughter, immediately suspicious that he had ulterior motives or was settling because of his own limitations. The prejudices and shallow thinking that both Amina and Omar had faced from strangers was now coming from their own families, which made it infinitely more painful. But both Amina and Omar held firm. They explained to their families what they had learned through their own experiences, that physical appearance was the least important criterion for a successful marriage, that character and faith and compatibility mattered infinitely more, that God had brought them together precisely because they understood what really mattered. For years, Omar told his mother, "You've watched me be rejected because of my leg and my scars. You've seen how much that hurt me. And now you're doing the exact same thing to Amina, judging her based on her body rather than her character. I'm ashamed that you would perpetuate the same superficial thinking that has caused me so much pain." For years, Amina told her family, "You've told me to be patient, that God would send the right person. Well, God has sent him. Omar is everything I've prayed for. Kind, faithful, responsible, respectful. And you're rejecting him because he walks with a limp? What does that say about our values, about what we really believe matters?" Eventually, worn down by the obvious strength of Amina and Omar's conviction and forced to confront their own superficiality, both families gave their reluctant blessings. The wedding took place 6 months later, and it was a celebration unlike most in their community. The bride was not traditionally slender. The groom walked with a visible limp. But their joy was so radiant, their love so obvious, their faith so deep, that everyone who attended felt moved by the beauty of a match that transcended society's narrow definitions. In his speech at the wedding reception, Omar said something that many guests would remember for years. "Everyone kept telling us it was a great match, but they meant it in the wrong way. They meant that we matched in our physical differences, as though we had both settled for less than we deserved. But the truth is, it is a great match. Not because we're both physically different, but because we're both people who learn to value what actually matters. We match in our faith, in our character, in our understanding that God doesn't make mistakes when he creates bodies in all their diverse forms. We match in knowing that real beauty is internal and eternal, not external and temporary." Years later, Amina and Omar would share their story with couples struggling with similar issues, helping them understand that the right person wouldn't see their physical differences as flaws to overlook, but simply as facts that were irrelevant to their worth as human beings and potential partners. "Great news, it's a match," they would say. "You're going to marry someone who is physically different than you expected, than society told you to want. And that's not settling. That's awakening. That's understanding what actually matters. That's seeing with God's eyes rather than the world's shallow gaze. This is the truth. The person you're meant to marry may not fit the physical standard society has programmed you to want. They may be a different size, a different height, have a disability, have scars or features society deems imperfect. But if you've learned to value character over appearance, faith over aesthetics, if you've matured beyond superficiality, you'll recognize them as the perfect match they truly are, physically different perhaps, but spiritually aligned, and that alignment is what creates lasting love.